Hi, everybody, and welcome back. This is Dr. B with Addiction Recovery. And as you know, on this channel, we try to bring all things addiction to you, but in particular, we try to take the scientific evidence and data, mix it in with clinical experience, marry the two, distill it down in a digestible parcel of information for you. Now, if you're the addict, we are hoping you can utilize that information towards your recovery. If you are a family or a loved one, same. And we also would like to reach out to the general public at large to change their perception and potentially policy change. Moving on with today's topic, it's a little often usual, but I want to dissect the question of why is the term addict demeaning? This is pretty, this question actually has a wider range of issues, and most terms in my field are demeaning. And in fact, in a field where it is so complex, the disease process, that it entails not only the body, physical health, and life and death and diseases such as hepatitis C, hepatitis B, HIV, but it also has such a large mental health and emotional component. In fact, I would argue that it is a mental health issue. It also has a large social implication, the terms that we use. And so it's critical for us to start changing those terms and addressing them. The term addict, let's start from a historical analysis of the term, very brief. You can go back, and because that itself will tell us how the term develops and what its implications in our current usage is. To the best that I can tell, it goes back to addiction, and its roots are Latin, used in Roman times. The term is addictus. It had a lot of legal and procedural usages, but in general, it meant devotion, sacrifice, being bound to something, abandonment, and betrayal and enslavement. Okay, keep those in mind. The roots during that time come from sort of a mythological story at that time of a slave who was set free by his master, and he had chains on. The master cut off the chains. The slave spent years wandering the land, and he was so uncomfortable in this freedom, he went back and enslaved himself and put the chains back together. This is profound, and it means quite a bit. It means someone did not prefer autonomy, did not prefer respect, did not prefer free will, but they preferred enslavement. Okay? And that goes back a long time. But understand that these things creep into and have a lot to do, the words that we use, in our perception of the world, how we communicate with each other, and our understanding and clarification of things. Okay? Coming up through time, 15th, 16th century, this term changed to an adjective, and in fact, it was used in some of the Shakespearean plays, maybe one. But coming up to the modern times, it sort of has a very mixed, confused meaning. We are using the meaning in the same sense at times of the way it was originally used, a slave that cannot break his chains even if it's handed to him. That is the meaning, right? It's really an assault on someone's personal integrity as a free individual human being. I won't get into it, but it's so obvious in so many ways. But we also use it in a very positive way. We might say, I am addicted to working out. Okay, I am addicted to a certain type of coffee or ice cream. These are sort of, whether right or not, these are positively reinforced comments and statements. So here we are using it in two different ways. In addition, keep in mind, to the extent that this term and a lot of other terms in substance abuse and addiction medicine have been used over the last 30, 40, 50 years, if they've had negative connotations, I would say that that has been promoted instead of stopped and changed. And you have to remember one of the reasons that may contribute to that. We are coming out of an era, starting with Nixon, of war on drugs, and then Nancy Reagan with her silly commercials about your brain on drugs. Okay, they were not only just trying to promote complete abstinence for every drug. They were wrong on most things they said, but in addition to that, it became an era that really peaked in the early 90s with massive incarceration of nonviolent drug offenders as our response to substance abuse. The science, the social sciences, and the indicators, even at that time, showed how wrong this was and how brutal and inhumane this was. And as a society that supposedly embraces certain values, many of them rooted in Judeo-Christian backgrounds, this was just, I have some harsh words for it, but there's a brutality there that it's difficult to describe. We knew then that this wouldn't work. Now we're actually starting to a little bit talk about it in our social conversations. And it might be simply because, and I'm kind of speculating, I haven't evaluated the complete data on this, is that we're running out of money and we're seeing the consequences of that kind of actions towards substance abuse. So it is in that modern era that the term addict and other terms that are demeaning that cause embarrassment and guilt versus clarification, education, and empowerment for a very marginalized community. It is in this era that these terms either stayed on or were added because it helped the status quo and our response to these folks. Someone did make a lot of money off of it, but that's another discussion and topic. So we're coming out of that term as well. And so we have this term addict. Okay. In addition, what are the other stigma attaching concepts and issues that this term implies? There's no hope for change when you're labeling someone with their disease in this way, right? We don't do that with diabetes. We don't do that with heart failure. And even when they're better and sustained recovery, we still call them an addict. In fact, many 12-step perception, the 12-step perception on this is you are an addict for life. It's important to understand that you have a problem that can resurface and you need to be vigilant of it for the rest of your life. But that's different to label me a slave for the rest of my life. It's not something I approve or condone of. Okay. Two, you're being defined by your disease. What other disease do we do that with where you're being defined by your medical condition, right? You don't walk around and call a guy cancer or diabetic or heart failure, right? And we have expectations in the face of the most difficult diseases where outcomes to be positive are very futile, yet we aim and fight for the best for that patient. And we never call them by that disease. Yet in substance abuse, right, a person can have 20 years of recovery and it's acceptable and okay to call them still an addict, and even worse, calling an active addiction an addict, because as I said, it doesn't allow you room for hope. And some of the terminology that we can use is a person suffering some substance abuse disorder, even a person is suffering from addiction, even though I have my reservations about that. And by doing that, we will actually probably, this in other terms and as a collective, change the outcome of the disease for the patient and client population, potentially change public perception and attitudes towards people suffering from this disease, and potentially change policy, health policy, and public policy regarding this disease. In short, what I'm trying to say here is that language of addiction and when we use it and how we use it matters. that language has a profound effect on a very complex disease on an already very marginalized population that needs to be really in some ways catered to. Again, not enabled, but catered to under care. They're receiving subminimal care at best. Their access to care is horrible. Their utility of the system is horrible. And we can have much better outcomes if one of the things that we do is change the language. And so it would change our approach and they would hopefully have better care. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to see related videos, click above. If you like this video, please click the subscribe and bell button on the bottom.